So this is the second in a new series of EFF-Austin meetups. Oh wow, a whole bunch of people coming out at once. It's like if you wash your car, it's going to rain. If you start giving a talk, people will walk in. So this is the second in a new series of meetups. We stopped for a while and we're having like occasional parties and events, but we weren't really having regular meetings. And we really needed a way to get ourselves to be disciplined about that. So we did two things. One is we made a commitment to Capital Factory, and they made a commitment to us too, to have these meetups here. And then we had the donation of a meetup instance, I guess you would say. So we're actually at meetup.com. There's a meetup that tells you that every month that there's going to be a meetup. So if you actually have this thing online that has its own built-in discipline and says every month you're going to have a meetup, then you kind of have to go along with it, and do it every month. But we really need to be doing that because this is a very interesting, in the Chinese sense, time for the internet and for computing and for cyber liberties, and kind of a great time for you if you're a security person or a spook or any of those things, but kind of a shitty time for you if you're just a person trying to get by in the world and keep your stuff relatively secure and private, and wanting to have some semblance of confidence that when you send an email to somebody, they're the only person that's going to read it. So we have those issues to talk about, and we also have things like net neutrality, or as I prefer to say, freedom to connect or open internet. But basically, knowing that the internet that you're connecting to is a reasonably dumb network, and that the transit between points is not being interfered with too much. There are inherently going to be so-called slow and fast lanes on the internet, but we really don't want the slow lanes to turn into like little tiny back alleys that you can barely navigate and have everything else be cable television. So we're concerned about that too. So those are two big ones that we're thinking about now, surveillance and net neutrality. But tonight, in a minute, we're going to have a talk about something that kind of relates to, especially to the privacy and surveillance issues and so forth, and that's how identity is represented online. And Tom is an authority and goes regularly to the Internet Identity Workshop, and he's going to give us a great talk about that. Before we do that, though, we would have an open mic, but there's no mic, so we're just going to have an open floor, I guess. And I know you got something, right?
So I'm here with Restore the Fourth Austin, and we're planning on having a crypto party August 7th at 7 at 301 Chicone Street. We're going to be talking about Tor and how to use it, teaching people on that for the first part of it. Second part, the floor is going to be open to flash talks, so if you know something in the realm of security and you want to do a talk on it, come on by. We'll get you on the list, and we'll do flash talks on it. So, any questions?
This is over at Satoshi Square, right? The
Yes,
new Bitcoin exchange place.
Bitcoin exchange place, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I don't know, I haven't been there yet. So it's going to be my first time over there too.
I went to the opening, and it's a very cool space. It's like a co-working space also. So if you're interested in the cryptocurrency realm, that's a kind of a focus point to connect with other folks that are interested in it too. So it's a good opportunity to check out the space as well as support the folks who Restore the Fourth, who have done some really, really good work for the last year and a half.
I got flyers, they're going to be on the back table if anyone wants them.
So what was that crypto initiative not long ago? Where they were trying to get everybody to add cryptography?
What do you?
It was something like reset. Was it reset? Yeah, it was,
Oh, just ready to what to use. Encourage people to use.
Yeah, I mean, there's a philosophy that some people hold that if you teach people how to use cryptography and people will all start using it, then that's one pretty effective way to increase the possibility of privacy and security for everybody. Just get everybody using strong cryptography. It's not necessarily straightforward though, so meetings like a crypto party, place that you can go to find out more about crypto and how it works and how you can encrypt your own stuff and do that regularly and reliably. So the crypto party is pretty important in my opinion. It's a great thing that you guys are doing that. Restore the Fourth, I think. Don't you guys have an intention to do them periodically and regularly?
Yes, we've been on hiatus for a while. Everybody kind of needed to take a break because we're a very small group, but decided we need to get back in the game. And around the same time, we started these meetings again.
Anybody else have anything you want to make an announcement about or talk about before we start? Yeah. Come on up to the front.
Hi. My name is Victoria Francis. I'm a student at St. Edward's University. I brought pamphlets. Actually, we'll just leave these in the back of the room and you guys can pick them up on your way out. But I just wanted to bring to the attention to everyone about the USA Freedom Act. If you're not aware of it, it's in relation to the NSA surveillance and all the stuff that's going on. So I just, sorry, I get kind of nervous. It's in the Senate right now, and there's a lot of things that are wrong with it because it doesn't do what it should be doing. It's not as powerful as it could be, and I think it'd be important for everyone to make it known to their senators and their representatives that it's not acceptable as it is now, because if it's passed, it could potentially even make it worse because the wording is so vague that it would allow it would allow the government to be able to construe it to their ideals and to be able to pick up on more than just what they can do now. So, pamphlets and more.
The pamphlets detail the problems and what to do, or what's?
They briefly describe the bill, and it mentions the problems, and yeah.
Does it have like a call to action? Does it say like what to do, like who to contact, or?
If you go, I think it's senate.gov, you can easily find senator and you can email them or you can send them a letter.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
If not, the EFF.org, I'm sure has.
Yeah.
Some more stuff.
I'm ironically doing the same topic for my capstone this summer.
Really?
Yeah.
So we got 2 capstones in here.
That's awesome. Yeah. Any other questions?
So I'm just curious, how many folks here know anything about the USA Freedom Act right now, besides the 2 capstones? So Claire might be willing to talk with y'all more about it. I'm sorry that I couldn't provide much, but it's definitely something we should probably know more about. So thank you for bringing that up.
Not a problem. I'm glad to be able to come and share my small knowledge about it.
We're really happy that you came. Anybody else?
Folks, announcements? Oh, I've got one.
Okay. Use your computer. Yeah.
So we periodically get inquiries from students asking about different things, but we also are getting inquiries now from our state legislators. And so Senator Zaffarini's office, Senator Zaffarini is the second eldest tenured senator in the Texas Senate. And so one of her interns is asking about the Texas code for botnets, curiously enough. And so let's see if I can find this. So I am not an expert either in botnets or in this part of the Texas code, and I'm not able to pull it up right now.
Was there a link on the mailing list?
I haven't sent this one out yet. No. So, but it's section 364 of the Texas Business and Commerce Code, and and it's just one particular section on zombie computers and botnets. And so they were asking, because this part of the code was originally crafted in 2008 and amended in 2009. So it's been a while, and certainly technology doesn't sit still, and our understanding of it and the applicability of the code also may be subject to review. So basically, they're just wondering whether there are sufficient consumer protections within the code itself, what they can do to action it. It seems like the intern for Senator Zaffarini's office was saying that they just don't think that people know about it. They don't think that people know that they have recourse if their computer has been taken over as part of a botnet. So if there's anyone that's interested in this part or has any expertise with contemporary botnets and such, yes, perfect. So so this is it. Right, so Title 10, Subtitle B, Chapter 324, Consumer Protection Against Computer Spyware. So most of this stuff actually is a 2007 act and went into effect in 2009. So this shit's pretty old. And
If anybody ever asks you to use the words botnet and zombie in the same sentence, you don't have any.
right, so zombie is actually, there's a definition for zombie in the Texas code, which is kind of interesting. But they have a certain definition of personally identifiable information, that could possibly be subject to examination. And then it's 324.055 is the actual section having to do with zombies and botnets. So one thing I was thinking about this, just in reviewing it real fast, was, well, what is the difference between a computer being taken over for the purpose of sending unsolicited electronic mail or sending signals to other computer systems that shut them down or cause a loss of service, or send data from that computer without the owner's authorization? It's like, well, we've got examples from the Texas, from a certain Texas magistrate judge that law enforcement actually does this stuff. They will take over computers and install malware on them and exfiltrate information from them. And so I was kind of wondering, well, how does that actually work as far as the law is concerned? Like where is the law enforcement exception to taking over people's computers for the exfiltration of personally identifiable information? So I don't know how exactly to approach that, but if you're interested in any of that, please come talk to me about it, and because I'd like to be able to provide something to Senator Zaffarini's office. They reached out to us, and that's always an opportunity to make a new friend. And so if we can make a friend with the second oldest senator in Texas legislature, that probably could be beneficial to us as we're working on some actual legislation this coming spring. So anyways, I just wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Well, which gets to another point, which is and we talked about this the last time as well. We really want all of you to be a bigger part of EFF-Austin. We want more people doing more things. We have a board of directors that's a working board, and we have no staff. And we depend on the people who care about the things that we care about to work with us collaboratively. So one of the things we hope to get out of these meetups is more collaboration with more people doing more things, because there's only so much we can do. And that includes, we're not a 501c3. We can lobby. We did lobby pretty effectively in the last legislature. The next legislature, we're going to be looking really hard at what bills are popping up and what they're going to be talking about. And we may find some things that will cause us to want to visit some legislators. And I know like Greg and I did some of that, Claire did some of that last legislature. And the more people we have to do it, the more people we can talk to and the more times we can talk to them. And it turns out that Texas is a really great place for that kind of interaction. In some other states, it's hard to actually get somebody to listen to you in some legislator's office. But here in Texas, they make a point of having somebody there who will listen to you if you walk through their door. So if you just find their door in that labyrinth over there by the Capitol, then they're going to listen to you. And we have done some lobbying or education, we called it, I guess, where we walked offices and made sure that we hit every office and maybe more than once and made sure that we had a conversation going with them and also targeted the people who were most likely to have some affinity with our positions and that sort of thing. We can do a lot more of that if we have more people involved. Plus we can have better parties and I mean we can really have some pretty great events. So I'm going to shut up now. Tom Brown is here. Tom and I go way back, and Tom and EFF-Austin go way back. And he's spoken here before, what, 2 years ago? 3 years ago, on a similar subject. Tom goes, what, twice a year?
Yes.
To the Internet Identity Workshop, which is usually held out in the Bay Area. And these are people who have been working on the problem of online identity for a long time. And I'm going to let Tom talk about that a bit, about what that problem is and why they keep meeting and having to talk about it and why it's been going on for so long and what a wicked problem it is. So Tom, take it away.
I'm Tom Brown. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to be here. As John said, I'm an authoritarian. Any other authoritarians here? No? Okay. Cool. Actually, this shirt is...
I said authority.
Actually, this shirt does not represent the Fed, but it represents Federated Social Web, which is kind of an initiative that's kind of loosely affiliated with like the Indie Web and some of the guys who are doing like indie type of stuff, social stuff, like Evan I can never pronounce his last name, Promduro, and Tantik Sulik.
You probably ought to define indie.
Okay, I will. I have an indie slide in a few slides.
Okay, good.
Let's see. So I've got the URL here at the bottom if anybody wants to like skip ahead, and it's definitely going to be like a link fest. Every slide has numerous links for more information, and I guess yeah, like John said, the first time I was like interested and actually went and attended a meeting that was related to digital rights was in January '94. I was actually working for the Defense Division of Texas Instruments in Dallas, and I saw on Comp Misc Legal posting about the University of Houston was going to have a computer law seminar. So I took the day off work on a Friday, drove down to Houston. Actually got to see my old high school Pascal teacher was at the meeting, and it was great. I learned a bunch of stuff, and some of the people who are affiliated with EFF-Austin were there, Ed Cavazos, and taught us some stuff about computer law. And then I guess I moved to Austin in 2002, and then shortly after that, maybe 2005, started attending some EFF-Austin stuff. So after that lengthy introduction, I gave a talk here 3 years ago, and it was a lot of it was kind of like theoretical, and kind of ended with like a cliffhanger because Dick Hart at the time had given this talk that got a lot of attention called The Decline of User-Centric Identity, because this was like 2010, 2011, and a lot of the kind of values that a bunch of us were kind of working towards seemed to be getting ignored, and like things that were disrupting the web, especially things like Facebook Connect and things like that. And so there was some recognition that, we can have good intentions and stuff, but there are some big players out there that have relationships with powerful interests, and they're going to get to dictate a lot of the conversation unless we do something about it. And so Kalia, as kind of a counterpoint to that talk, she said, user-centric identity is not dying, it's just getting started. And so that's kind of where we left off 3 years ago. And I'm going to pick up from there. And what is user-centric identity? And a lot of this this talk, if you're expecting me to talk about privacy, this is going to be light on the privacy. It inevitably will come up, but this is going to be more about control. And that's a lot what user-centric identity is. It's the ability to be who you want to be online, whether it's anonymous or pseudonymous. The ability to share verified attributes about yourself, and the ability to curate information that's out there about yourself to correct stuff if there's something wrong. And so a lot of this today is just going to be about getting control back that seemed to be slipping away. So what has happened since then? Well, I've been attending the Internet Identity Workshops in Mountain View Computer History Museum. And one thing that happens once every 5 years, at least for now, is there's a Google, their lead of identity, Eric Sachs, who's just a wonderful guy, a real friendly guy, and really reasonable and smart. He gives these 5-year reports. And so he gave one in 2008 to kind of like forecast what they see as the challenges for the next 5 years. And then he gave one in May 2013. And what I found was interesting was like what they didn't prepare for in 2008, and they didn't see the spread of mobile devices coming in such a massive way that they did. So 2008 was like right before like maybe a hockey stick adoption of mobile devices, and so they had to kind of regroup and change their identity direction for that. Another thing that was really interesting about that talk was their capabilities with all the different data sources they have, whether it's GPS from Android devices or whatever. They can tell with a very high degree of accuracy if the person who's logging into your account is you. And oftentimes it's like 99.999% accuracy. It's just, scary that they're so accurate about that. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Another thing that's happened in the identity workshop is people are very interested about health data. One thing that I find very interesting is that when you talk to people and you ask, who owns the health data, oftentimes, even if you're like an IT group, people will say, it's the health providers own that data. And then, I'm not sure that's such a good answer. I think a lot of people think that patients own the data. And so there's one of the projects I'm kind of interested about is the Blue Button Patient Data Project. They're actually applying technologies that are emerging in IETF to kind of give patients more leverage in that relationship and better access to their data. If you're interested in like IETF protocols, one of them is the dynamic client registration protocol. So it kind of just reduces the barrier of allowing application to get data with consent of the patient, so that the provider doesn't block it as much. It's a tough problem, but they're kind of making some progress. Another thing that was interested was the unhosted initiative. The idea is not to keep your data in a silo and to use some of the latest emerging technologies so that you can choose where your data is stored. People have to agree on what schema the data is in, so that's kind of a difficult thing. Although I totally love their their direction that they're trying to achieve. I'm not so optimistic about the path, because they're kind of like trying to do the architecture, solve a big scary architecture problem first, where this next slide will kind of tell about my thoughts about adoption. And with identity systems, and Chris Messina was like kind of one of the first people I saw write about this in 2006. He made out the point that, you know, identity systems are chosen by the services that we choose to use. So as 2006 and 2007 were going by, it became more and more obvious that Google was providing all these wonderful services for us to use. And so we were really getting addicted to Google services, and this was really pushing us into identity systems that would be provided by Google. And so oftentimes that's not considered when people are talking about, oh, this is how we should design an identity system. Well, all that's moot if you're not providing valuable services, because that's the path to what an ID system gets adopted. And for instance, I worked on a pilot project for a big school district, and we chose OpenID Connect, and it was a good choice for the school district because the school district was providing all the services. There was no question about who was providing the services, and so there's one database of students, and so the school district chose all the design of the ID system, and that's just the way it is when you're in public school. And then we also have the NSTIC initiative, which I guess started roughly in 2009 through the Department of Commerce, and it's a national attempt to have an identity system for both government and business use, something that uses strong authentication. And so kind of applying this idea again, you know, who's providing the services? Well, if, you know, theoretically, if the government's providing the services, they'll have a lot of say in what the identity system looks like. However, NSTIC is open to everybody. The proceedings are ostensibly transparent, and anyone who wants to attend and participate can. And for some reason, it's very hard to get people to participate in this, even though it's such a big, potentially a big deal. But the idea is to reduce costs, because as you can imagine, if you can eliminate paperwork for, you know, big business transactions and government transactions using online identity, there's millions and millions of dollars to be saved. And at any time, please do not hesitate to interrupt me. I'll gladly stop and pivot. So where do we left off in 2011? Well, shortly after our meeting, Google decided to weigh in and heavy-handedly decided that they were going to enforce real names policy on everyone. And Dana Boyd wrote this really articulate article about why this was just horrible, and it specifically affected people in vulnerable situations, whether you know they had domestic problems, or whether they use their identity system for work and they didn't want to get it confused with their personal stuff, or, you know, all sorts of, listed like a dozen different reasons why this would be a horrible situation. Google was making this mandatory. What was worse was they were like folding all of their services into this one Google Plus identity thing. So if you wanted to use any of the services you've been using and producing content, you know, if you didn't accept their, you know, conditions, you lost everything. And so this was horrible. But the good news is people screamed and kicked consistently. But I guess within the last week, they finally decided they're going to let go of it. And there's like cognitive dissonance for me, because when I go to Identity Workshop and I see somebody who's so delightful as Eric Sachs, you know, give these talks about Google and just, you know, make all the sense in the world, and then for 3 years, you know, have Google would have this horrible policy. I'm wondering, who exactly are they consulting to make these policy decisions? It's just, I don't understand. There was no explanation why they adopted this horrible policy, and they just kind of said, oh, okay, by the way, we're dropping it now after 3 years of abuse.
Can you say why you think it's horrible?
Oh, yes. I mean, the main thing to me, and the hardest thing to get across to people, is that although if you're a privileged person, and the first real names, big, widely adopted real names policy implementation was Facebook, and Facebook emerged out of a very privileged environment of Harvard. And I remember the first time I saw it, I was visiting a Stanford grad student. I just realized how exciting it was. But if you can have a real names policy, that may work fine in a privileged area where, in that context, it's great to use your real name. However, as people who are less economically have less economic means, and people who are vulnerable. I mean, especially even people who have bad relationship with the police for some reason or whatever. Anybody who would prefer to have a handle or something definitely doesn't want to have a real name associated with all their relationships and stuff. And in particular, when you have that real name, that means you have one identity, and that means that you can't have other identities. And to me, that's horribly constricting, because you ought to be able to be who you want to be online, and you want to be completely okay for you to, especially growing up. These policies apply to young people as well as us, that you're just figuring out who you are, and you have to make mistakes and stuff. And if you have one identity and that thing gets subverted, then that's it. You can't have a good experience anymore.
If you don't have somebody related to their actual identity, is there an accountability issue? Like, if you can't see who they really are, does it make it easier for them to do like bad acts, that sort of thing?
Oh, well, yes, that's certainly the case. There are certainly times where if somebody is misbehaving online, it's easier to take care of that situation if you have their real name. But I think that that is, as Bruce Schneider so often says, is you have to have a little bit of slack. If you just have a few instances of problems or whatever, even if you're not able to correct the situation because you can't find them or whatever, you ought to be able to tolerate that, because the alternative to that is there's no tolerance for anything like that, and that's a bad thing.
I'm curious as to your reaction and thoughts about federated single sign-on, and with its somewhat recent popularization, especially with modern web apps based, basically allowing, or I guess kind of encouraging you to log into pretty much everything with your Facebook, and I don't know kind of how that relates to all this.
What I think about federated, I don't think that it's going to come out of a private company or anything like that. I mean, we've tried and we failed miserably. And so whenever the market fails miserably like that, you need to have government step in and mediate the situation. And so hopefully, and stick with all the dangers that might be there with such a centralized identity system. There's also the potential of resolving the problems of federated identity and getting people to work together. So I definitely think that the best thing about federated identity is the ability to choose who your identity provider is. And because if you're stuck with one identity provider with identity lock-in, then that identity provider can slowly make the conditions of your existence worse and worse and worse, and boil the frog until it's just horrible. And that's what I consider, some of the big social sites right now are doing.
Are you going to talk about Instick later more?
I definitely, I can come back to it. I don't have like a slide though for that. Okay, so that was in August, and then this one's kind of like a curveball. It's like, programmer be programmed. What is this doing in this talk? The idea of program or be programmed will actually, I'm too ambitious if I think I can like summarize that book. The idea is that if you just like, you know, skills in reading and writing, in today's society, you have to have at least some skills in creating things on the web, making the internet the way you want it to be by having some skills in creating. And so the reason I bring this up is just kind of identify some kind of minimum things that I think are helpful for the context of this talk. And one is the ability to create a domain for yourself. That seems like a reasonable thing to expect of people, even if they don't want to be a programmer for whatever reason. And also understanding of links and be able to create a link and understand what the benefits might be to when creating content that's linked to on your own site versus having people link to your content on, say, Facebook. And just being understanding the concept of a link and not having all your links in one place and being in control of the site that people are linking to you on. And so here's another curveball. Is Bruce Schneier came out with what I thought was a really good article called "Power in the Internet," and the main idea there was, we have all this disruptive things going on, and this is really great for us at the beginning. But the problem is that powerful interests can use these disruptive technologies in a much more amplified way than a normal person can. And if we just don't do anything, then they're going to, powerful interests are just going to take control over the internet and make the internet into what they want it to be instead of what, normal people want it to be. And if we, want to make the internet work for us, then we have to do something about it. And so I won't do that slide anymore justice. Okay, so how do we get out of that problem? We can't just continue to do the same things over and over again because at least from where I sit, we failed. And if we continue doing what we've been doing, we'll have the same result, and entrenched powers will just get further entrenched. So, what do we do? Okay, so one of the where I got this shirt was the Federated Social Web Summit of 2012. I think the first one was in 2010 in Portland. When I went to it was in the Bay Area, and it was in 2012 where Tantex started promoting this idea called Posse, which is publish on your own site and then syndicate elsewhere. So the idea is that you publish on your own site the canonical copy of your content. Where do you want people to link to so that you get credit for it? And then you can send copies to Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and without the expectation that people are going to link to those kind of secondary areas. So that's like, a lot of communities get a lot of momentum just by agreeing to some simple conventions. And this is like a simple convention. It's like, okay, we're gonna start off with baby steps, and another Bill Murray reference, baby steps, and we're just gonna adopt simple conventions. And the first one's Posse. Own your own domain and publish the canonical content there, and then copy to other ones. And then the other practice is self-dogfooding. So this is kind of why I'm a little bit skeptical of the unhosted initiative, because the first thing they're trying to do is like create this architecture that will, you know, make everything decentralized. And I totally am up with that. But I think that the proper way to go is like to create these tools yourselves and use them yourselves. It's going to be ugly at first, but you got to dog food these tools and go through the pain of doing this stuff. And we do it together, because that's the only way we're going to come up with something that's resilient, that we can continue to use in a way that we don't get stuck in a silo. So, yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of the problem that we have with the telecommunication providers now and the contracts that we sign with them, where the content that we're creating when we are initiating calls to one another is immediately a business record owned by the telecommunications provider, which is then able to be extracted from those systems by law enforcement or intelligence agencies, or whoever the case may be. So part of the solution, I think, is exactly this, where we are the ones that are in control of the content that we are creating, and we are the ones who are establishing contractual relationships with network providers, establishing things on our terms rather than accepting some sort of boilerplate contract, which gives us no rights whatsoever.
Yes, and so yeah, that may be like one of the biggest motivations, is you're avoiding the terms of service contract. Like the website Wikia, my understanding is that when you create, and Wiki is this really popular thing where all these communities, you know, put content on, but when you create content there, that's Wikia owns that content, and you're not allowed to take it off to another place. That content's stuck there forever, and you know, that's got to be totally unacceptable to people who are serious about creating content. And so for every silo, there's a you know, the terms of service usually aren't that bad, but they normally just, they start out and then they just get worse over time. And you know, like Dan Boyd says, you know, it's okay when like a policy, you know, whatever the policy is, it doesn't matter what it is, at least if it's static and persistent and it doesn't change over time, people can accommodate that and adopt that in their practice. But once you start changing the policy every 3 or 4 months, then you just make life, you know, terrible for people. And like I said, usually it seems to get worse. So so this it's called the indie web movement, and I don't want to like you know, be a cheerleader for a particular movement or whatever. But I'm really impressed with IndieWeb's ideas. One of the processes they use is don't use email. They have a real-time IRC channel, and I've been on it for like the last 3 or 4 weeks, and it's always active. And the value of that is you get your answers immediately rather than waiting for an email reply. And it's like, you know, usually the things you want is just like a small thing. You got like 70, 80, 90 people on the channel. Somebody's there to give you a quick answer, and you don't have to wait for email, and you know, you don't get stuck somewhere. And so that's, I definitely see the benefit of that.
What is that channel?
IndieWeb, pound IndieWeb.
It's on Freenet?
Yes, it's on Freenet. Freenode, yes, Freenode. IndieWeb Camp. It's not IndieWeb. If you go to IndieWeb, if I missend you to there, there'll only be like Tantic on it. But IndieWeb Camp, if you go to IndieWeb Camp, there'll be like, you know, 60 at least people on there.
Well, one thing I can add is that I talked to Tantic last month, saw him give a talk, got really fired up, and it was on my to-do list to put together an indie web camp here, if anybody's interested. That's that could be a really good EFF-Austin project, among other things. So it's something that we may be doing within the next 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, that would be totally cool.
You'd help, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would definitely help volunteer for that.
Is there a protocol so I can make sure that the person that I wanted to let link to my my site is indeed that person? How do you Or is it a personal thing I will meet at the bar and exchange code and therefore
Are you just talking about like normal web
in
links?
this concept?
Well, this is like, what's also interesting about this is just like the most, Amber Case kind of described it in a real-time conference talk as we're kind of going back in time to 2003 where the wheels kind of came off and not use any of the newest technology. So when I am talking about these basic things that AnyWeb is starting to do, it's like really the basic web stuff. It's like link to another person's site. And so there's a simple protocol called web mention. And so you get, when somebody links to your site and they're using the web mention protocol, you'll get a ping on your site. And I'll show a demo with WordPress how this works. And then you can approve that, and then that'll show up on your site. So maybe if I do the demo, and then maybe I can see if I addressed it. So that was 2012. The Federated Social Web Summit I went to was in October 2012, and Tantic was there. And so it was very interesting to hear him and others who have been frustrated over the prior year because they were trying to do this kind of stuff, but they weren't making progress because they hadn't kind of adopted these processes yet. Because there's one main thing, which is often a problem, is there's too much talking and not enough getting code out there and dog fooding code. So that's like a show don't tell is kind of one of the main mantras of the indie web, and so he kind of talked about that at Federated Social Web. And another interesting thing that he said, I appreciated the frankness of him saying most people don't care about whether their thing's decentralized or whatever. They could just care less, and so we have to recognize that, and we shouldn't try to kill Facebook. We should try to create tools that replace our Facebook usage. So just lots of just good common sense or whatever that those guys are practicing. Okay, so this is a link to use cases that are okay, so we're dog fooding our software. What use cases do we need to solve to have a Twitter, replicate what Twitter does? And so web mention is one of those things. In Twitter you can click on the tweet and you can see everybody who replied to that tweet. Well, that's kind of what web mention is. So that's kind of the one use case is, I want to click on somebody's post and I want to see all the replies to it. But I don't want to do that in a silo. I want to do that on my own site or when I'm visiting somebody else's site. So, and then there's a number of use cases listed there. And so once you get all those use cases taken care of, then you can replace Twitter and not have to use Twitter anymore. But, I have total respect for Twitter. I mean, if there's one site that's doing good stuff, it's Twitter. Okay, so now demo time. And so I'm going to show two software projects that, these are alpha or beta at best quality. Some interoperability that we'll see, but in some cases not. So this is just like I said, we're starting out ugly, but at least we can kind of see where it's going and see what the potential is of once people start, working together on this stuff.
Being a virtual maker.
That's right. And yes, and so this is totally new software, a month or two fresh. Okay, so this is, I figured I'd do WordPress because a lot of people do WordPress and it might be easier to get started using WordPress. I'm actually using two WordPress plugins for this. The first one is actually one that's provided by MailChimp, and it's just called Social, and it lets you do the posse thing. It lets you write a post on WordPress and then have the option to send it to Twitter or Facebook or whatever. So that's the MailChimp social plugin. And so let's go ahead and try that out right now. I'll do a new post. Let's say, hi from EFF-Austin. Testing 1, 2, 3. And then I'll check this broadcast post under social broadcasting. And then I'm actually using an idle Twitter account of mine that I don't use. So it'll show up there. So I'll hit publish. And then ask me if I want to send this out to Twitter. And so I've created a post. And we'll see if it showed up on Twitter. Let's see. So we've done the posse process where we published on our own site and a copy got sent out to Twitter.
So could you make it go out to Twitter, Google Plus, and Facebook, all in the same click of a button?
Ideally, that would happen, and I'm sure that if there aren't tools already that allow that to happen, there will be very, very soon. That you can do Twitter and Facebook with this plugin. I didn't see Google Plus as an option.
You can cascade that. You could have it go to one and then from there to another. So for instance, you make it go to Twitter and then you set up Twitter to post your Facebook account. And I've actually got it set up so that if I post to Google Plus, it also posts to Twitter and then Twitter posts to Facebook.
Okay.
So one goes to many, basically.
Okay. So yeah, there's that option, and then like I said, these tools are so fresh that this is just more like proof of concept is what we're seeing right now. Okay, so that was the first WordPress plugin, and then the other one is just like IndieWeb, and so what that is implements the web mention functionality. So I'll go ahead and let's see. I'm not a very good mouse user, believe it or not. Okay, so here's the post that I just made. And so what I want to do is I want to mention this. This isn't. I mean, we used to do this a long time ago, back in the Technorati days or whatever. Although it got real spammy. And so web mention has some mitigations to make it so not so susceptible to spam. Oops. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a post from my blog, and this is Pants, and Pants is also just like a month old. I guess I need to log in. So testing web mention. So I'm making a post with the link to the WordPress post. And so now when I go to my WordPress, I should have, yeah, okay, so I've got like one new thing I need to moderate. So I'll click here, bulk action, approve, and then apply. All right. Go back to my thing, and there it is. So it's got a comment right there. So that's kind of like the Twitter where you click on the tweet and you get to see the replies or whatever. And you can see it's in the recent comments as well. So that just kind of demonstrates some interoperability that between like a Ruby on Rails called Pants and then the WordPress.
How does that differ from painbacks and trackbacks?
The protocol is, I'm not familiar enough with the way the trackbacks happen. It seemed to me that there weren't any like controls on it that anybody could just like track back and spam you with it.
Yeah, it was very spammable.
Okay.
Pingback was supposed to like be an improvement on that.
Whereas with web mention, what happens is when you do a post and you link to a link, then you do a discovery thing where you there's like 3 different ways to get the URL, the web mention URL. And so the first one is just like in the header, there's like a link tag that has the URL for you to talk to the web mention. And then you post to that saying, hey, I just linked to you. And then the guy who you've linked to has to approve the message. And then in the slides, I've got a link to the web mention page because I don't know the differences exactly between web mention and pingback, mostly because I don't remember how pingback worked or what was the other one called?
Trackback.
Trackback, yeah.
So that was older, and then pingback was.
Yeah, pingback was, I guess it was automatic. It was like Mullenweg created pingback because trackback was so dirty, kind of dirty, with spam.
Okay, so let's go back to pants for one more demo. So actually, what I'm going to do is, okay, so I've got my blog here on the web, and what I want to do is I've got a instance of pants running on my laptop, and okay. And the reason it says Andy is because that's just there's a default user on the development when you're doing development of this, so that's why I ended up with Andy. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can follow my Here's Tom with the Weather on the web. So all I have to do is put my domain in, and then click follow. And notice how easily it is, to use. You just put in the domain and click follow, and now I'm following it. Now the thing that's not fully developed yet is you want to see a timeline of everybody you're following, right? And so that's kind of the thing that is still not done yet. Is oh wait, yeah. So I don't see my Here's Tom with the Weather posts here in the timeline yet, but it should be there soon. People are working on it as we speak.
Is this syndication RSS based? Is that what they're using to move content?
Well, that would kind of be the default way to do it if you didn't have an alternative. And so far, I don't know of any alternative. So for right now, there's kind of like the assumption that you're on top using RSS.
Right.
But that's not necessarily the case. I'm not sure what will happen. Okay, so demo time is over. Are there any questions about the demos? All right. Okay, so.
Can you describe exactly what pants is?
Oh, okay, yeah. It's there's a web framework called Ruby on Rails, and it's not. It's mostly not usable for people who aren't Ruby on Rails developers. So what I wanted to show was the concepts rather than the software. The software will be commoditized, so it doesn't matter what the software is. But Pants is just a website or a project that uses Ruby on Rails that aims to do all the stuff that, say, like Twitter or Facebook does, but you do it on your own site. So I'm Here's Tom with weather.com. I should be able to do everything that I need to do on Here's Tom with weather.com and not have to go visit a silo to do my normal social stuff.
So all of this stuff is really geared to independence from,
yes,
like the big corporate sites.
Yes.
Got it.
It's been participating too, sounds like.
Yes. So what is the significance of this? There was a For the Win kind of book signing a while back at Amelia's Retro Grove, and Corey came and talked. And one thing that really stuck with me is he said that everything everything we do together is on the line, because these days everything that we do together is online, and that was like something I hadn't really kind of thought about before. And then I thought, yeah, just about everything that we do as a community, we do online these days. And so when you have interests encroaching on that, and we've just seen the case where Facebook is manipulating feeds and stuff, that they're subverting the integrity of your communication with your peers. That's like uncool. So what I wanted to talk about, reality. It's not just about collaboration with our peers, but also reality. There's a Tom Standage, who wrote The Victorian Internet, which is like a great history of the telegraph. It's a short book, highly recommend it. But he's got a TED Talk where he talks about ancient social media, and he says, it's funny that because we were born in the 20th century, we just kind of take for granted the broadcast medium of television and everything. That was just like we were a fish in that fishbowl, and we just assume that was part of, always that's the way it was, newspapers. We thought that we always, perceived things from, the New York Times or whatever. But you don't have to go very far back, and then all the way back in time. It's like, we had social media. All of our ancestors had social media. They were, we got our news from our peers and stuff, and we're starting to do that again. And so the value of our peer relationships and acquiring the news and constructing our reality is now, so much more than we have ever seen, because we were born into the the 20th century, and so when I see sites like Facebook starting to mess around with our news feeds just because they can, and subvert the integrity of the communication and subvert what reality is to us, that's like a huge red flag to me that says, hey, wait a second, yeah, I know that people on television manipulate us, but this is two completely different things. That's an entertainment box, and this is, us getting news from our peers, and they're not the same thing. So don't tell me this is just like television or newspapers, because it's completely different. That's it.
Things that go out to Twitter, Facebook, whatnot. When our peers do comment on things that we post, how does that feed back in to that? To like our site, or how does that work?
Right now that's kind of an open issue, because like John was asking, what's the current practice? So really that hasn't been worked out yet. So kind of for now, and it's a horrible solution where you just use RSS. But the news feed is not a use case that has been implemented yet, but people are working on it like right now and trying to deliver it. So I don't know.
A coming feature.
Yeah.
To kind of add to that, it's not going to combine the comments and stuff back to the source, but I use a tool called ThinkUp. It's an open source tool written by Gina Trapani that aggregates all your social media content into your own server. So it has a cron job that runs every 15 minutes, pulls everything I do on Twitter, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, wherever you want, and all kinds of stuff. And it also pulls down all the comments and saves everything locally, your own copy. So if your account ever gets closed or stuff gets deleted, you have your own copy on your own server, on your own system that you control.
Yeah.
And it's not going to connect it back to, if you wrote a blog post and post it on Twitter, it's not going to necessarily connect back to that site and post it on the site for other people to interact with. But at least you have a copy of it somewhere that you're in control of.
What's that called?
ThinkUp.
ThinkUp.
It's open source, but they also have a paid version of it now. So if you don't want to host it yourself, they'll do like a paid hosted version.
So they give you a silo.
Kind of, but you can pull that data and put it on your own server anytime because it's all open source and you can run it yourself. I run my own copy, so.
Yeah.
It does require a big database though. I've been running it probably since they started it probably 4 or 5 years ago, and my database is over a gigabyte, and that's mostly just Twitter data.
Just text.
So.
Just text. No photo.
I think it actually does pull in photos too. You can control it. So if you post photos on like say Twitter, it will copy those photos down as well. So again, you don't lose it if that post goes down.
Your gig. It's gotta be.
Most of it's not photos, no, because it pulls in so much relational data because of all the other content from all the users. It also pulls in metadata. So if somebody posts a map, it'll pull in like metadata about the map, the geolocation data. It actually like extrapolates geolocation data addresses for you automatically, so you can cross-reference it. It pulls in a lot of metadata and a lot of indexing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I hear over and over again, but doesn't seem to like hit the media, is that content creators are very concerned about just having control over their data, backing up the data, and there's just not enough communication to let them know that there are solutions out there where they can have control. And you know, right now all they know about is Dropbox. But you know, if I was talking to them, I'd say, you know, please check out OwnCloud. It's open source, and you know, you can use a hosted version or your own. But the key thing is that you have a choice. You're not stuck on Dropbox, and the Dropbox is not a place you want to be on. And then there's other just simpler solutions. If you're just doing like photos or whatever, I've had like really good luck with Trovebox, which is open source. And so I've been like, whenever I have photos I want to share with family and friends and stuff, I just got a custom domain, and using Trovebox's hosted thing. Again, you could use your own. You don't have to use their hosted thing. It's open source. But the fact that you have the choice to move your data wherever you want, and you have control over it, and it's a great service. I've got you know, mobile apps and stuff, and it's all open source. I highly recommend it. So they're
What's the Dropbox?
Oh, the OwnCloud is the alternative to Dropbox, and then
How do you spell that?
OWNCLOUD.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
Oh yeah. And then the photo service that I've had good luck with, open source, is Trovebox. TROVE.
What was the one that Edward Snowden just recommended?
Spider Oak.
Spider Oak, yeah.
Yeah.
Spider Oak, I think, is more of a backup service. So.
But they're expanding into Dropbox-like functionality.
Yeah, it's just it's encrypted.
Yeah.
And I'm not a crypto person, so like with Snowden stuff, that's like above my pay grade. but I am very interested in control of your own personal data and stuff. So I definitely can talk about that. But the Snowden stuff, I'm just enjoying watching the show.
This is an odd question, but do you have like death plans? Because when you die, then how do you arrange for your will online for your data? That's my thing, then how do I manage mine?
I think it's an important question, and people have realized the importance of it, and have had I think
The inevitability of it?
yes, that's right, and the permanence. Right?
Sorry.
Yeah. Most of my time spent, I'll be dead.
No duel.
What's that?
No duel.
Right. So yeah, it's good to get that right because you have one chance. Yeah, legacy is important.
In a sense, you're curating also.
Yes.
So it is legacy.
Yes. I don't have any recommendations for that. I do know that there's conversations about that. I know Kalia had one at South by Southwest. I think that would.
Chanel Reynolds has been talking about that too.
Okay.
And part of it is just different people could prepare different ways, but if you die and nobody has your passwords,
That's what I mean, sort of built into these little cocoons you're creating, in a sense, these sort of identity cocoons, and they're supposed to be a way it takes on a life of its own, and it's your data.
Yes. I don't have a good answer for that. I know that like I've given my credentials for like one important account of mine to someone else, but other than that, I haven't done anything. So that was just like a simple thing of find somebody I trust, give them the username, password, and then every time I update the password, I have to tell that person. But other than that, I don't have any good like skills or whatever.
You could do something like the LastPass or KeyPass or something like that, and store all your passwords on there, and then have your password to that system be part of your will.
Yeah.
The only company I know that has anything like that now is Google. You give Google the other person's email address, and if you don't log on within a certain time frame, like a month or 3 months, something where you said, okay, I'm dead, it's 3 months, I haven't logged on,
Okay.
that person then has total access to your Google properties. Doesn't mean they have access to all the other stuff, but they have access to the Google products.
Is that a free service?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool.
It's kind of hard to find,
Okay.
but it's in there.
If you're Google name calls you Google it.
Yeah.
Just hope they don't disable it.
Just go into accounts. If you're interested, you go into your accounts page and it's in there. Hard to find.
Oh, it's called inactive account manager.
Yes, inactive account manager.
I remember that
That's it.
stupid bureaucratic name. Inactive account manager.
The problem I see in that though is say you have a married couple and I give you my password, you give me mine, and we both die in the car crash. Then what happens?
That's why I said you should put it.
Well, that's why I think in the will or on a document that you keep updating the password, like your LastPass password or stuff like that. Like Julie and I have a safe, and that safe always has the current password and logons to everything. So that's how we manage it. But I think you're looking for a piece of software that manages that.
Well, I'm also looking for beyond just numerical stuff. I'm a writer, I also have artwork and things like that. So it's more like you're talking about photographs and images. There's more to us than just bank accounts and things like that. It's all of that other stuff we acquire and perhaps want to pass on in a legacy sensibility as researchers, as writers, as people who program and things like that. There might be things. It's a curious idea that we collect this stuff, we want to control it, but then once we collected these things we care for, how do we pass those on beyond just our family, who then too will die? And so it's sort of an interesting idea of we're creating these sort of capsules of individual lives.
And I think there has to be both your digital person, but your legal person has to be considered. I mean, there's legal issues that are involved here as well. So
and with copyrights and all that too.
So it's very complicated.
Tom, not to derail it too much, but this is just weighing on my mind too. You mentioned earlier that like Facebook came out of kind of high socioeconomic status environments in that context, and it occurs to me that this kind of stuff is kind of also doing the same thing. I mean, we're talking really complicated stuff here for the average user, and I'm wondering how much of an awareness among the indie web people there is for like user interface design and setup simplicity for these sorts of services.
All I can say is better awareness than I have. There's definitely it's heavy on the designer. And the community is a lot of designers there, and definitely they've all been involved in user-centric identity efforts and looking out for being able to accommodate everyone instead of just accommodating the people who created people like the people who created it. So I get the sense that they're very trusted and that kind of stuff.
Okay. So here's my conundrum. We have everybody, all these tools. His comment about it's not necessarily going to be for necessarily average Joe. And I have a real scenario, which you brought up earlier, which is the patient record scenario. Who is trying to now start to think this way? One question. Two, it may be past your pay grade.
When you say-
When will we have that solution?
When you say start to think this way, what exactly?
What you really need to have, because right now, the patient record, the effort, you mentioned one, I know of one here in Texas at the Texas Health Society or something like that. It's kind of come up with one, but it's going to be a federated approach, because there's so many scenarios they can justify it on.
Right.
And we'd be happy, they would, for things like anonymizing. There's one I just heard on this one. Basically, you as long as you anonymize, they can start picking up some of these drugs that start to counteract with other drugs. But things that had not been tested, but now it looks like that this, if you take this drug with this drug or whatever, you shouldn't. Some life-saving kinds of scenarios. So that's my question for you would be, how soon do you think, and who is it that's beginning to look at it that you know?
Well, my sense is that it's going to be private companies that are doing most of the development.
But do you know about this other stuff?
I don't know.
They're going to come up with their own.
Yeah, they're gonna, yeah.
Well, Google already is, and Microsoft and Apple announced theirs last week.
Yeah, this is an area that I don't know very much about. All I know is what I saw with the blue button. I was very impressed with, but I haven't spent much time. I do know that it's huge. I mean, as far as identity goes, that the health records is probably the biggest thing.
It's really hard to, I mean, speaking of wicked problems, there's some really strict guidelines around that.
Yeah, well, the HIPAA, I mean,
yeah.
Once you worked out the scenarios and you think you have a solution, and that's why something like the Texas thing is that they're already messing around with HIPAA, because just for a doctor to talk to another doctor, they want to have a secure line that is validated. I forgot who, so they've already crossed that line. A lot of the EHRs, and some of them are here in Austin, crossing over that line.
Yeah, I do know a guy who used to be working in that realm, and loves to talk about it.
Okay, good. Yeah, that would be a good topic. That would be, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I guess one.
Go ahead.
I didn't want to. Okay. It kind of going along with what he said, kind of reminded me of like now, you know, with Snapchat, Wicker, Text Secure, like a lot of these encrypted apps are, and so a lot of things, something that people are trying to do these days with social networking is to be encrypted and for it not to be permanent, for it to be deleted. So do you know of anything like that is maybe happening on that front other than the things that I mentioned, that maybe like social network, like encrypting social networks, or they like not permanent social networks, they just automatically delete stuff?
Yeah, I'm almost certain that there was like a lightning talk about something like that at HopeX this past weekend. It was definitely a subject of conversation. So I think that there's a lot of awareness around that, and my sense is that people are taking that very seriously now. I guess we haven't done that in the past, but I guess this year we're taking a lot of things more seriously.
It would be nice to have things deleted after like 6 months. Who goes back and looks at what you posted 6 months ago on Facebook, besides somebody that might want to use that information against you?
There has no one.
Did you want to talk about NSTIC any, or
how much? You got a question? I'm not very knowledgeable in the area, but if I don't know the answer, I can try to find it.
That's okay.
Okay.
How about you mentioned a few times the Facebook news feed experiment.
Yeah.
And how familiar is everyone here with that particular news item that came around? Does anyone want to talk about it? Or? hear about it. So
I thought one of the aspects of it was the way they were, I mean, who was gonna take responsibility for it? The university that was involved with it said it was really Facebook that did it.
Why don't you describe the situation?
Okay, yeah. In January of 2012, a social experiment occurred. Cornell University helped prepare for the experiment, but Facebook did all the data collection. And then on June 30th of this year, it became known, and I can't remember when, it wasn't like a popular site that first made people aware about it, but that this experiment transpired. And so first people were saying, oh, this went through an institutional review board, it must have, so that they made sure that nothing bad could happen. And certainly people, gave their informed consent or whatever. But then, quickly, like over the weekend, July 1st, it became clear that it didn't go through an institutional review board. But even so, Facebook defenders were saying, well, there was consent because there's a terms of service agreement that said, you allow Facebook to do research when you participate on their site. And then Kashmir Hill from Forbes looked at the historical archive of terms of service for Facebook and realized, oh no, that research clause wasn't added until after the experiment happened. So like maybe in March of 2012 is when they added the research, but I didn't see anybody retract their, glowing statement that Facebook had the research clause in their terms of service when they really didn't.
We didn't really describe the experiment.
Okay, so the experiment was, and I haven't read the actual paper, but only the description by the principal investigators. And the way the principal investigators described it was similar to that they wanted to see that if they removed like positive posts from your newsfeed from your friends, and they did this to about 670,000 participants. They removed the positive posts from your friends in your newsfeed, if that would make you sadder, and then assuming that if you make a similar like sad post, that would it have that effect? So if all you see is sad posts generally, and then will you start making sad posts yourself? And then the other way was tested too, where they removed the sad post and they showed you happy posts. Would you respond by happy posts? And the principal investigator said, but we constructed this experiment this way because we think that if you make such posts, that's indicative of you becoming happier or sadder. So we are deceiving you. Well, they didn't use these words, but we are deceiving you. We are emotionally manipulating you to conduct this experiment. And so you can imagine that with people who do real research, that this was like, what's going on, that there was no review board, there was no consent, and even worse, it's now almost August, and none of those 670,000 people have been notified that they were participating in this experiment, that they were.
What was the result?
Oh, at least one suicide.
Yeah, I was
Was there a correlation?
Yes. So their hypothesis was confirmed that people will respond to happy posts with happy posts and sad posts with sad posts. And so one of the craziest things that Jay Rosen pointed out was that that weekend when all this thing was starting to emerge into the public, Cornell told its researchers not to talk to the press. And so it's like, what exactly is going on here where, academic people aren't being told by their university not to speak to the press and answer any questions.
The study violated an ethical standard around the way these studies are conducted, and Cornell's position now, and you can read this on their website, is that because they didn't actually conduct the study, because the data was gathered by Facebook, that the ethical standard was unenforceable because another entity was actually gathering the data.
They just were built on Facebook implemented.
It's just a service bureau, that's all. They're just a big service
They have on staff.
Yeah.
And they didn't just remove, they didn't just subtract information, they willingly injected negative news posts into people's feeds, and then they upped and they increased and decreased the amount of emotional, either negativity or positivity, or if people weren't responding in the way that they thought they should have been responding. So they were willfully manipulating people and applying more and more pressure onto them to get them to respond in the way that they wanted to. And it violated a slew of ethical conditions.
And normally when you do that, you're called like journalists.
And as an example, whatever, I am now only doing sad posts on. I hate things.
Just look at the Facebook promotional manipulation.
Yeah,
it was huge.
Viral.
Yeah, it was very popular these weeks.
The anger at Facebook over Facebook was enough to prove that that hypothesis was.
Well, I think Fox News has been conducting this experiment for several years.
And yeah, and one last thing I wanted to say about that is, to me, it's very interesting just the responses on you see. There's definitely like two camps. There's like the privilege, the advertising industry, the people who make money from the advertisers, and then there's people who are actually aware that the experiment happened and don't belong to that privileged group, and they have completely different responses. And I would characterize the advertising side is very intimidating responses I saw, and then very misinformative. Like one example was, they said we have these statistics that we collect every week about Facebook Connect logins, and we can see that even though this experiment happened, that Facebook logins is increasing still. So we conclude that that people don't care about this, and they
or 80% of the people in the room didn't even know.
Right. Yeah.
They didn't go to the other Earth to find out.
Yeah. I mean, how can people?
Where's the control?
Yeah. People weren't even everybody that I've talked to that's on Facebook that I know, nobody was aware
There's
of
a
the
terrible
experiment.
correlation there because it's a holiday weekend, so those logins are going to increase anyway. It has nothing to do with the news story that only 15% of the population was aware of.
But it was ironic that it was Independence Day.
Right. Yeah.
It was Groundhog Day.
I guess sort of the subtext of that whole thing about privileges, and Kalia pointed out to me that I'm privileged because I sort of said I actually don't worry as much about like being more public online, right? But then I'm privileged. I'm like a white male, and I don't have the same concerns that somebody who wasn't a white male may have. But the real subtext there is this idea of creating an internet that's for the privileged and making it uncomfortable for people who are less privileged to use it, which is back to your thing about the the enforcement of real names. That's the effect that it would have, really, because some people can't be comfortable giving their real name in an environment that's more or less public.
But whoever had it here, it's got if that's the intended market, it's got to be easy. In fact, the test would be the next Arab Spring. You could just drop these cell phones and they wouldn't get caught. They wouldn't get. Because you'd use mesh networking. Hopefully, in a given square, you could have a mesh, or Cairo, or wherever, whichever city. That would be another scenario. Mine, I would not know about this.
Okay. Did you have one?
Well, he just reminded me of something that I remember reading about Facebook and like people deactivating it. Like there's, that they're like teenagers and other people who were, had issues with exes, women, like stalking. So, like, they'll deactivate their account every time that they log out or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely like and just myself, I'm a person, but still I worry about my, employers finding me, and that's a huge thing that a lot of people, if you're not, you don't have to worry about your job, then, you're always worrying about, well, is my employer going to see what I post, and are they going to think one way or the other about it, fire me?
So that's where this relates to privacy. I mean, you said that it wasn't really connected to privacy directly, but at least indirectly, the extent to which you can't control your identity is also an extent to which you can't control your privacy.
Yeah.
Well, and the irony is that for you to say, I don't want my boss to see it, means the boss better follow a protocol that truly identified them, which as you started your talk, you were trying to make it so you would have to have that protocol. I mean, it's a mixed world. The answer, John, is that in some case, sometimes you are privileged, and other times you're not. And now how do you have that hybrid world? I possibly could even visualize that one. In my scenario, you drop a whole bunch of cell phones and just distribute them out willy-nilly at the next people's uprising or something.
The point is complex and phenomenal.
Or you stay within everybody's public. Everything you do is public. Now, but it's the middle.
No question over here.
So I just have, we're talking about the identity and online identity. I guess for me, and using my real name online, it's kind of in the same aspect as in maybe art or just my vanilla life. You have a work identity, you have a family identity, you have all these different identities. And online, I would like to have that same right. And I would like to have that same right to not have to have those identities all intermeshed with each other or conflicting with each other, because we're complicated creatures.
Yeah. I have a real world example of this, our school teachers. So I have friends who teach in elementary school and high school, and their private life is very separate from their school teaching life. So if you're a young, attractive female high school teacher, and you're of age, you're 21 or older, you're legally allowed to go to bars and drink and have a fun time with friends, but you may not want those photos posted for your students to see, and then all of a sudden, the school drama and rumors and things start going around. It can be a real problem if you're using a real name and everything you do is public everywhere.
As a teacher that got fired for Facebook pictures or something that's still.
There you go, exactly.
It's fine in a bar, whatever.
Yeah. Question in the back.
Just one thing about the dropping the million cell phones scenario. The problem with that's going to be those cell phones are soon going to have kill switches. What?
Kill switches. Kill switches. Turn them off.
No, I'm going to make, there's a meeting the last week of this hardware startup. John, is anybody in those? Turn them out.
Maybe this is way too basic an observation or not, but I mean, it's not just that Facebook is doing these horrible things and mining our identity or whatever, but that's their revenue model. I mean, they're making billions of dollars to do that. So what is the revenue model for a social networking system that doesn't employ those? And I mean, sure, it can be lightweight, but it doesn't have to be a billion, but you've got to have some sort of infrastructure to construct, to sort of manage that, to keep that going, to make it a viable alternative. I mean,
I think
the competition to Facebook doesn't have to be $1 billion company, but the competition to Facebook has got to have some sort of money to be able to sustain itself. And if you're not mining your users' social information, where does that money come from?
Go ahead.
One thing is just imagine if everyone's computers were commoditized, and instead of Facebook getting all their advertising revenue, all the people that offered up disk space, bandwidth space on their own computers was shared communally among the people that supported the network, whatever network it is. That's why I'm so big into the cryptocurrency stuff, because they're a proving ground for that model. of commoditizing everyone's computer resources. And, you know, I mean, you know, obviously there's a lot of advertising revenue available, but Facebook gets it all as opposed to you. I mean, that's why he's saying instead of posting your content on Facebook, have your own, you know, page or whatever. But I mean, yeah, they're definitely improving that model where, you know, I mean, if he's running a node on his laptop that's, you know, serving up whatever, you know.
If you're that valuable, therefore you are privileged. That's the.
Well, I don't.
And I would actually, who lives and wants your content, then hey, you better.
Overstock wants my content because
Yeah,
they're selling it.
well, they're
But I would actually completely disagree with what you're saying about cryptocurrencies, because right now,
They're just a proving ground. It's just the base.
yeah, I mean the current cryptocurrencies, the network is actually, you
But
do
look
not
at
get
MaidSafe and Ethereum and what's going on.
Yeah, there's some are trying to prove out a model where you get compensated for running nodes, but right now, Bitcoin and all the major cryptocurrencies don't pay you for running nodes. You actually do it out of goodwill.
But you could theoretically solve the identity problem if your entire identity is encrypted to your own devices and it's portable across any network.
And before we get too far from the cell phone thing, are you familiar with the Indie Phone project?
Yeah.
And I think that is worth a mention too. There's a project in the UK that's trying to get crowdfunding for a completely open source, open hardware cell phone. With, you know, built the OS, the radio hardware, everything from the ground up to be completely open spec.
Is that crowdfunded or Indiegogo?
Crowdfunded. I think they had an Indiegogo campaign, but yeah, Indie Phone.
Well, one of those.
Well, I was thinking what he was saying about the revenue model. I think it's just kind of a culture change. Like why is it that we can fund Wikipedia, but we can't fund a social network? Like, you can do it through nonprofits. You can do it
People
through.
have made attempts to before.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's a big problem. It takes a lot of money and you have to have people actually adopt it.
yeah, but Wikipedia is huge and it still is around.
You have gravity around Facebook and Twitter. You're going to have something really compelling to get people away from it. And it's going to have to be a free service because people don't pay for that sort of thing.
Yeah,
They pay
Wikipedia's
for
not a
social
network.
content.
You have a significant network effect with Facebook and with Twitter. The adoption drives adoption. Basically, people go where the people are.
People.
And it's hard to lure them away from that. There would have to be something pretty egregious to happen for there to be a mass exodus from Facebook. Either that or a great alternative offer.
You know, people are familiar with the notion of apps, you know, for better or worse. And you can imagine that like a web provider offers apps that people pay for that have certain advantages over, you know, Facebook or whatever. So that could be one possible revenue model
It's still the same issue, right? You're always going to have to commoditize the user in order to generate revenue to sustain itself, unless you've got a distributed model that can support itself based on micro transactions that the user's devices are creating.
And people have to learn.
Well, yeah, but
Whereas
you
the
can
guy
make
who's
those
got the
things
money
easy
can
enough for people
advertise.
to adopt quickly.
It's coming though.
It is.
I think we're 6 years away at least.
6.
No, the general wants to say 5 to 10.
Yeah.
It's always 5 to 10 years.
There's some money the indie web could disrupt Facebook.
Well, next month, we may be finding out about one of those technologies. We're going to have some of the local folks here to talk to us about cryptocurrencies. And we're actually still looking at getting people together for that panel. So if you know folks here locally that have some expertise in cryptocurrencies, or then direct them our way. Let's see if we can get together a panel or some discussion like that. I wanted to ask, first, let's give Tom. I was wondering, we're putting together the meetups for the next few months. So cryptocurrencies is next month, and we're doing third Mondays up here. What are the other things that y'all want to hear about? What are the things that y'all are curious about, or that has captured your attention that we can actually go and put together a meetup around it?
Spaceship